She had cleaned rooms for 11 years. She had found things people leave behind. Wallets, prescription bottles, goodbye letters, things that made her knock on doors at 2 in the morning just to make sure someone was still breathing. But she had never found anything like this. Room 14, the Sunset Manor Motel, Hollywood, California. November 1993. The man in room 14 had been there for 31 days. He paid in cash every week. He kept the Do Not Disturb sign on the door for 3 days at a time. He was quiet in the way that worried her. Not rude. Never rude. Always a small nod in the hallway. Always a thank you that sounded like he actually meant it. But quiet in the way of someone carrying something heavy that they had decided not to put down. What she did not know, what the motel's front desk clerk did not know, what almost nobody on that block of faded neon and cracked asphalt knew, was that the man in room 14 was Keanu Reeves. Not Keanu Reeves the concept, not Keanu Reeves the box office name attached to Speed and Point Break and Dracula. The actual man, 39 years old, somewhere between the version of himself that Hollywood wanted him to be and the version he was still trying to find. He had money, he had fame, he had a career that most actors would have traded everything to possess. And he was living in a motel room that cost $50 a night, under a name nobody recognized, for reasons he had not explained to anyone. On the 32nd day, he left without the Do Not Disturb sign. Maria Gutierrez had worked the morning shift at the Sunset Manor since 1982. She had raised 2 children on that salary. She knew every room the way a doctor knows a patient, its sounds, its smells, its particular way of holding light in the morning. Room 14 was the one at the end of the corridor, the one where the window faced the parking lot instead of the street, the one where the heater made a sound like someone tapping a finger on a table when it first came on. She had always thought it was the loneliest room in the building, not in a dramatic way, just in the way that some spaces collect a certain kind of quiet that other spaces don't. She knocked twice, waited, knocked again. Nothing. She let herself in. The room was clean. That was the first thing she noticed, and it surprised her. 31 days, and the room was nearly as clean as she had left it. The bed was made, not perfectly, but made, and the kind of effort a person makes when they were raised to take care of spaces that weren't theirs. The small desk by the window had a chair pulled close to it, a lamp angled toward a stack of papers. There were 2 coffee cups on the nightstand, both rinsed out. A pair of motorcycle boots stood by the door, with the kind of precise placement that comes from someone who still notices where they put things, even when everything else feels uncertain. There was 1 suitcase. Dark canvas, simple, no monogram, no airline tags. It sat at the foot of the bed, partially unzipped. Maria was not a person who went through guests' belongings. In 11 years, she had replaced towels and emptied wastebaskets and pretended not to see things that weren't her business. And she understood the privacy of temporary shelter in a way that people who have never needed it cannot fully understand. But the suitcase was open, and what she could see from where she stood stopped her completely. Envelopes. Dozens of them. White envelopes, sealed, stacked carefully inside the main compartment of the suitcase. Each one had something written on the front. Not an address, just a name. A first name, and sometimes a last name. Maria, from her position near the door, could read 3 of them from where she stood. Rosa. Jimmy. The woman at the shelter on Cahuenga. She stepped closer. She could not help it. Not out of curiosity. Out of the feeling that she was looking at something she needed to understand. There were at least 40 envelopes. Maybe more. Each one sealed. Each one labeled in the same careful handwriting. She picked one up, not to open it, just to hold it, and she could tell from the weight that there was something inside. Paper. Folded paper. The kind of thickness that comes from bills. And then she saw what was underneath the envelopes. A notebook. Spiral-bound. Well-used. The cover bent back from being opened and closed hundreds of times. It was sitting open to a page near the middle, and Maria read the first 3 lines before she understood she was reading something private. She put it down. She stood in the middle of room 14 for a long moment. The heater tapped its finger on the table. The parking lot light fell through the window at the angle it always did, a stripe of pale November sun across the carpet. Then she went to the phone by the bed, and she called the police. Not because she believed a crime had been committed, and not because she was frightened. She called because she was a woman who had worked in this building for 11 years, and in 11 years she had learned to recognize the particular shape of a person who was at the edge of something, and she did not know which direction this particular person was going to fall. The officer who came was young. He took notes. He looked at the suitcase. He looked at the envelopes. He looked at the notebook and read more of it than Maria had allowed herself to. Then he sat down in the chair by the window, and he was quiet for a moment. "What's in the notebook?" Maria asked. The officer looked at her. He had the face of someone trying to figure out how to explain something that didn't have a simple explanation. "It's a list," he said. "Names and amounts. And next to each name, a reason." "What kind of reason?" He looked back at the notebook. "Why they needed it," he said, "from what I can tell." He turned a few pages. "There's a woman on here who lost her house, a man who can't pay for his daughter's surgery, a family on Normandy that he apparently just watched moving boxes into their car on the street one morning." Maria looked at the suitcase. "How much is in those envelopes?" The officer shook his head slowly. "Enough," he said. "Enough to matter to the people whose names are on them." They found Keanu in the motel's small parking lot an hour later. He was sitting on the curb beside his motorcycle, eating a sandwich from the diner 3 blocks over, watching a group of pigeons negotiate over a piece of bread near the dumpster. He looked up when the officer approached, and his expression was not the expression of a guilty person or a frightened one. And it was the expression of a man who had been waiting to be found out and had made peace with it. The officer asked if the suitcase was his. "Yes," Keanu said. The officer asked about the envelopes. Keanu was quiet for a moment. He looked at the pigeons. One of them had won the bread and was walking away with it in a way that suggested it had no real plan for what came next. "I was in a bad place earlier this year," Keanu said. He didn't elaborate on what kind of bad place, and the officer didn't ask. "You know how sometimes things pile up on you and you don't know what to do with any of it?" The officer said he understood. "I couldn't fix any of the things that were wrong with my life," Keanu said, "but I could see things that were wrong with other people's lives that maybe I could actually do something about. So I started writing them down. I'd just writing them down at first. And then I had the money, and it seemed pointless to not use it for something that mattered." The officer looked at his notebook. "Why the motel?" Keanu looked at him. "Because if I'm at my house in the hills, I don't see any of this." He gestured at the street, the diner, the parking lot, the city block in its ordinary November entirety. You can't help something you can't see. He was not delivering a speech. He was not performing humility for an audience. He was sitting on a curb eating a sandwich, explaining something the way you explain something to a person who genuinely asked, direct, and without decoration. Maria was standing near the motel entrance. Keanu noticed her. He raised his hand in the small nod she had seen from him for a month in the corridor. She raised her hand back. The officer asked what he wanted to do about the envelopes. Keanu stood up. He folded the sandwich wrapper carefully and put it in the trash can by the motel entrance on his way back through to room 14. He zipped the suitcase, picked it up, and carried it to his motorcycle. "I'm going to finish delivering them," he said. "That's what I came here to do." He never spoke about that month publicly. No interview, no profile, no social media post. In a decade when celebrity charity had become its own form of marketing, Keanu Reeves drove a motorcycle around Los Angeles, handing sealed envelopes to strangers whose names he had written in a notebook, living in a $50 a night motel, because he believed you cannot help what you cannot see. Maria Gutierrez told the story once, to her daughter, many years later. She told it the same way she told the stories she believed were worth keeping. Not as a celebrity anecdote, as an explanation of something. Some people, she told her daughter, become famous because they want the world to see them. And some people become famous in spite of themselves because they are too busy looking at the world to worry about whether the world is looking back. Room 14 at the Sunset Manor was eventually repainted and renumbered. The heater was replaced. The window that faced the parking lot was fitted with better blinds. But Maria kept her morning shift for another 9 years, and every time she let herself into a room that had been marked "Do Not Disturb" for too many days in a row, she knocked twice, waited, knocked again, and she paid attention to what people left behind. Oh, if this story reminded you that the quietest people in the room are often carrying the most and giving the most, then this channel is for you. Subscribe now, because here we don't chase headlines. We chase the truth about what makes someone worth remembering. Turn on the bell and come back for the next story. The ones that matter most are always the ones nobody planned to tell.